A project is completed by going through several processes, and some of these processes are related to initiation activities, something like a project mandate, a project charter, or a project initiation document, or a request from management to go ahead and start a project. That's an initiating activity that gets a project going. And there's a couple of processes that happen in that. And I'll show you on the next screen what processes exist in it. The majority of the processes are going to be related to planning and project management. Almost half of all of the processes in the PMBOK guide are related to planning. Almost everything in the project needs to be planned, and these plans can be modified later on, but they need to be planned at some point. So there's going to be almost half of all the processes, and there are 49 processes, right? There's 49 processes, almost half. What's half of 49? 24, so there's about 23 or so that are related to planning. And there's also a few processes related to executing activities. So these are processes where something is being done on that project. And we also have processes related to monitoring and controlling, where we're keeping an eye, and that's the monitoring part, and then we're controlling by making change requests or adjusting details of the project or replanning so that we're still on track for the project. And finally, there's one or two processes that are related to closing, and those have to do with closing a phase or closing, procurement activities, or closing like contracts, or closing out the project. So at some point the project does need to come to a close, and the processes that would be related to that are the closing processes. So we have 5 process groups: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. Before we move away from this one slide, I just want to reiterate a few things. Let me just bring this whiteboard back here, and let me erase these things, right? This is how the 5 process groups will overlap. We have initiation happening here, right? This is initiation. These are processes related to starting a project. So this is initiation. Just going to write initiation, if I can, inside here, an I. Once the project is initiated, we start with the planning activities. So here's planning. Right? This is where we do all sorts of planning. We gather requirements, we develop the scope, the WBS, and so on. When we have enough planned, we can start with execution. So we don't really have to wait for all of the planning to complete. We can start executing. Execution starts here. This is where we know some things and we can start to execute them, right? And as soon as we execute, we need to, you guessed it, we need to monitor the results. When we monitor, the goal here is to make sure that the outcomes from execution, they match what we have planned, right? So they need to be equal or maybe better for us. So we need to make sure that what we have executed matches what we have planned, right? The requirements that were not planned. If we feel on monitoring that the results, if we feel they match, then fine, we can go into the closing activities. So let me lift this up. Oops. Right? We can go into closing activities. We can slowly start to close pieces of that project. But if we feel that the results, for example, they're not equal, right? If they're not equal or they don't match, then what we have to do is we need to control that outcome. So that's why you have monitor and control. And in control, we typically do it through change, right? We have some changes that we will introduce, and those changes will go about changing your original plan, which will then be executed and then monitored and then, if needed, controlled and so on. So that's the life cycle there of the project, all the way from initiation to planning to execution, monitor, control, and then at the end you have closing and handover of your final project product. Okay, so these are the 5 phases. Sorry, the 5 process groups. In the 5 process groups, just to mention another point here, in execution is where you can expect the most money and resources to be used. Okay, that's when the work is happening. So if it's construction, then it's the actual construction project activities. So you're building, you're digging, you're putting up frames, walls, structures, and so on. If it's IT, this is when you're, maybe implementing the product, you're doing the coding and you're testing. So in execution, the majority of the money and resources will be consumed. Changes can be expected at execution. They can be, if we find out that we missed a few things, the changes can be mostly a result of, or maybe a reaction to bad performance, or maybe a way for us to bring things back on track. So that's what we expect to happen in the 5 process groups. Now let's go to the 10 knowledge areas, and we can wrap up this one session. The 10 knowledge areas are shown here, starting from integration all the way to stakeholder management. Let me show you on the next 3 slides what they are, and let me explain them as we go along, right? So here you have on this chart, right, you have the knowledge areas shown here, right, going down, and then you have the process groups at the top. Initiation, planning, executing, monitoring, control, and closing. And then down here you have integration, scope, schedule, and then there's a couple of other slides that will have the remaining knowledge areas. In case you're wondering why this is starting with number 4, that's chapter 4 of the PMBOK, and that's where integration management is, and that's why you have it as 4. And you'll notice that the number sequencing carries through. So this is chapter 4, and developing project charter is a process related to integration management. So it is in the knowledge area, integration management. It is also in the process group, which is initiating, right? You'll notice that the number carries through. So that's 4.1, right? This is 4 here, and this is 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, 4.4, 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, and that's how it usually works. So if you're a 6, then 6.1, 6.2, and so on. This makes it easy for you to go to the PMBOK and just double check a lot of these information or cross-reference the information. Let me give you an idea what these knowledge areas are. As I mentioned previously, the knowledge areas and process groups, they crisscross and they hold 49 processes altogether. So there's 49 processes spread out. This is not the only slide. Here's the second one that includes 4 other knowledge areas, and here's another one that includes 3 more knowledge areas. So 3, 4, that's 7, and 3, that's 10 knowledge areas. I'm going to start with scope management, and I'll discuss integration last. Starting with scope management, this is the knowledge area that has to do with understanding the requirements and scope of the project, and then managing the delivery of these requirements and scope. Schedule management has to do with creating a proper schedule and being able to manage that schedule as we go along on the project. Cost management has to do with understanding the costs of the project and developing a budget, and then eventually controlling the cost. Quality management includes QA, QC, and planning for quality. Resource management is mainly HR, so it has to do with identifying the resources and estimating how many you will need, and then in the execution you'll see that we have to go and acquire the resources, develop them so they can do efficient work on the project, and then manage them when there's problems. And then we control those resources as part of monitoring control. Communication management has to do with identifying what information needs to be shared on the project. We plan for it, we make sure it happens, and then we control it if there's problems. On this third one, we have risk management. This is thinking about what could go wrong with the project and analyzing it as a risk, and then coming up with a mitigation plan, which you'll implement here, and then you'll keep an eye on the risks as you go along. Procurement management has to do with contracting, so you plan for what needs to be tendered out to subcontractors and so on. You do the tendering process, and then you need to manage that during the project. Stakeholder management has to do with identifying who has anything to do with the project, which we call a stakeholder. who's affected by the project or who can affect it, and then planning how to keep them positively engaged, and then managing the relationship as you go along. I mentioned that there's the last one that I was going to talk about was integration management. Integration management. The reason I left this for last is that integration management is a little bit different from the other ones. It represents, in a way, the framework of the project. If you look at it, it has an initiation activity, which is the project mandate or project charter. Then this is the planning. This is where you do all of your planning for your project. So it says develop project management plan. This is one huge plan that includes all the plans that you see on the next few slides. So all of these are part of the project management plan, right? Everything that you see in planning here is all part of the project management plan, and that's what we're referring to when we say develop the project management plan. In execution, as far as integration management goes, it just says direct and manage project work and then manage the knowledge. It is not a specific activity. This is how we keep an eye on our project. So we will be delegating some responsibility to the team members to get things done. We'll make sure that information is being retained where necessary. Monitor and control is just basically what it is, monitoring and controlling the work and acting on changes where required. And in the closing process for integration, we have close project to phase. So what you'll notice is that the processes in integration management here, all the processes here, they kind of like match the knowledge area by naming convention. It's almost like the framework of the project, and what it represents is the activities or integration activities that a PM would have to do to pull all the pieces together. So a decision being made on a schedule needs to consider the cost effects, quality effects, the risk associated, and so on. A PM never really makes the decision without considering all aspects of the project, and that's called integration. So that would be our first knowledge area once we get into the knowledge areas in details. A few things that I would like to mention here is common terms that you will see. Things such as work performance data, work performance information, work performance reports are seen all over the PMBOK, and I just want to explain the small differences between them. When you assign a task to someone, let's remove these, right? Let's start with a new page, right? If I assign a task to someone and I gave them I gave them a 10-day job, right? This is a 10-day job. And let's say this is a linear type of job. You would expect that in 5 days they would complete half the work, right? So in 5 days you can go and double check with them and ask them, how much have you completed? If they said they completed 5 days, then what they gave you was work performance information. So that's the first one that you see there. That's the work performance information on the left. And that tells you that they've done 5 days worth of work. The work performance information is where you translate that to say that it looks like then we're on time because we've completed 5 days worth of work in 5 days, and that's what we expected. So my work performance information will say that we're on track. And finally, a work performance report is where we take that and put it into some sort of a presentation and such, and we show it to management to represent that we are doing fine. So these three terms, they show up throughout the PMBOK, and I just wanted to explain it before we move forward, and then later on you might get confused on them. Next, we have the business documents that are used in project management. Mainly, there are two documents that we use related to the business. Number one, the project business case. This usually happens before a project starts. A study is done to validate the value of that project, to give justification for it, and there are promises of the benefits that we will get out of this project, as well as estimates of the cost and the risk associated with going on with the project. So a company wants to build a 20-story building. and lease it out as office buildings, someone would have done the business case to calculate all the costs that this will have upfront and then on an ongoing basis, as well as the returns or benefits that you're going to get. That's called a business case, and that's usually done before a project starts. Okay, you'll see here that the business case is an economic feasibility study, and it looks at whether a project is valid considering the benefits and costs. It lists the objectives and the reasons for why we're initiating the project, and it is used as a way to measure project success because we're basically looking at, did the outcome match what the expectation was. The project business, the business case is used throughout the project lifecycle to continue validating the project for viability. It's also used before the project initiation for the go, no go decision, and may need assessment as we go along to see if the business case is holding through and whether the project needs to continue or not. Speaking of needs assessment, usually when a business case is done is because management has a need, a business problem, or an opportunity that they're looking to capture, and for that a needs assessment is done and it's presented in the form of a business case. When a business case is approved, then that is used to initiate a project. So that's usually how it works. The last document that we need to discuss here is the Project Benefits Management Plan. And what it is a list of the benefits that we can use to track as we complete the project. A benefit doesn't always have to be financial. It could be a technical delivery just to confirm that the project is deliverable. So if you complete one phase and it has a technical deliverable, then that's considered a benefit and it acts like a stepping stool to the next piece of your project. So typically a project manager would list out different milestones, and these milestones of the project represent key deliverables for that project, and they are considered benefits. As we complete every milestone, a certain benefit is realized. Again, it does not have to be a financial benefit. It could be a technical benefit. It could be something that confirms that we're still strategically aligned. It could be something that says we're still on track, and so on. So we typically, in projects, maybe this is called a deliverables list, but it could also be a little bit different and can represent milestones that are of significance to your sponsor who initiated the project. That brings us to the end of this session. I hope it was informative. If you like what you're hearing, I would like to request that you subscribe and turn your notification on. If you think this would help somebody else, please feel free to share. Sharing is caring. But subscribe, turn your notification on so that we can let you know when the next video is released. Thank you, and I look forward to talking to you on the next video.